Welcome everyone. The Darkmoon Faire is in town this week, and well, yes, mostly that just means getting the reputation buff that can help with the ridiculously agonizing undermined cartel reputations. Seriously, by the time I'm going to be able to paint my car, I'll have moved on to other zones where the car can't be used anymore. So what was the point of that again? Sorry, very early for me to be distracted already, but my point was that's what most of the Darkmoon Faire is. A distraction, because a lot of strange and questionable things seem to be happening over on that fairground. Voidy, old guard type things. This has led to a lot of speculation over the years, and the recent Darkmoon rewards from the trading post have only raised these questions again. Questions like, what is the Darkmoon's Faire connection to the old gods? Where does the Darkmoon Faire go when it's not active? Just who is Silas Darkmoon? And with all things purple being more significant every day as we progress through the World Soul Saga, I think maybe it's time to take another look at this seemingly innocent carnival. Ahead of you, down the path, a majestic, magical fair. Ignore the darkened, eerie woods. Ignore the eyes that blink and stare. Fun and games and wondrous sights. Music and fireworks to light up the night. Do not stop. You're nearly there. Behold, my friend, the Darkmoon Faire. These are the signs that lead to the Darkmoon Faire, and you've got to love it when the advertisement for something includes a disclaimer. Don't worry about the weird, spooky woods and strange blinking eyes, folks. Look, sparkly, bright. So, you know, what is going on with those dark and eerie woods and those eyes that blink and stare? Before I really get into that, I should probably start with a little of the history we know about the Darkmoon Faire and its proprietor, Silas Darkmoon. Assuming he isn't an old guard, because I will be going into that later, Silas Darkmoon is a gnome who, on first appearance, seems to be as friendly and mild-mannered as that implies. If you chat to him, he stays firmly in engaging with the public mode and pushes his attractions at the fair. In a story from the Warcraft Legends comic series, he makes a point of being very clear that the Darkmoon Faire is a place where the law is respected and violence is not tolerated, even when he and his fellow carnies are attacked. All in all, the sort of guy you expect to be a pushover. And this is what I love about the gnomes. People so easily tend to underestimate them. Perhaps the first clue that there was a dark side to Silas was the exact story from this comic, Blood Runs Thicker. The story revolves around Carrie Hicks, the strongest woman alive, who you might recognize as the lady who gives you the Test Your Strength quest. During and after a performance where she shows off her strength, Carrie is harassed by a couple of wealthy young men who decide they want to teach her a lesson. Silas manages to semi-diffuse the situation with a bucket of water, but when Carrie wants to fight back further or report the incident to the guard, Silas stops her. This all leaves Carrie feeling pretty disillusioned. She had joined the fair because Silas had promised her family, but now she feels like this family doesn't have her back. When another member of the fair tells her to calm down, it goes about as well as telling someone to calm down ever does. And the next day, one of the young men who have been harassing her turns up dead. He was murdered rather gruesomely, his head crushed as if someone had squeezed it, the way Carrie would squeeze coconuts in her act. And so, of course, she was blamed. Again, Silas seems to respond with the mildest of manners, but he does work to defend Carrie, politely requesting his way all the way to discovering who the real killer was, the surviving brother who had seen an opportunity to double his inheritance and taken it.
One more thing, sir, I almost forgot.
Silas also organizes to have Carrie rescued directly, apparently not trusting the justice system. Sure enough, even though a witness comes forward to corroborate Silas's accusation, the boy escapes justice because his father, a powerful and important man, lies to protect him, not wanting to see his only remaining son hanged. But the father also kicks his son out because, you know, the whole murder thing, and that is when we finally see the real side of Silas Darkmoon. The young murderer is knocked unconscious. When he wakes up, he finds himself lying in a coffin at the bottom of an open grave. Above him, by the light of Azeroth's moons, Silas and the rest of his Darkmoon Faire family are looking in. The boy realizes he's lying on another body, the brother he murdered. Horrified, he tells Silas he thought he didn't allow violence at the Darkmoon Faire. Silas agrees, but points out they're not at the Darkmoon Faire, and they bury him alive. It's a great story, and Noble did an amazing version of it that I discovered when I was researching this video, which I highly recommend you go watch. It's also a story that shows very clearly that Silas shouldn't be trifled with, but it doesn't really prove he's evil. I mean, for a give or take definition of evil. That is going to be down to perspective. What it does prove is that Silas, and the Faire in general, operates on its very own specific moral code. At the Faire itself, they obey the law and they don't allow violence. They don't want any trouble. It's bad for business. They also don't deal with the guard if they can help it, suggesting that it's not really that Silas respects the law so much as he doesn't trust cops and doesn't particularly want to draw their attention. And who can blame him for that? But Silas talks about the Darkmoon Faire being a family, and despite what Kerry initially believes, it seems they protect their family. And let's be fair, the young man that Silas and his fellow carnies murdered wasn't exactly a shining example of innocence. He murdered his own brother in cold blood, and was all set to get away with it purely because he came from a family powerful and rich enough to protect him from the law. He's also portrayed as an all-around bad guy, showing to be spoilt, small-minded, sexist, even ableist. In general, the story isn't subtle and would have the most fragile people on Earth whining about inserting politics into games if it was written today. Silas absolutely is on the wrong side of the law when he takes his retribution, but you could also argue he's on the right side of justice. I wouldn't say the story presents him as some morally good character, but I don't think you could call him pure evil either. On the classic fantasy morality chart, he's probably a chaotic something. These days, the Darkmoon Faire is found on Darkmoon Island, but that wasn't always the case. Once, the Darkmoon Faire travelled around, and it was in a different place every month, so it could be in Melgore or Alwyn Forest, or later even in Outland. This all changed with the Cataclysm and the introduction of Darkmoon Island. We don't know where this island is. For 1 week a month, the carnies set up portals to get there from Melgore and Alwyn Forest. If a character logs out while at the fair and logs back in while the fair event isn't running, they'll be teleported away. So what's going on at the Darkmoon Faire when we're not there? Warlocks got an idea when they visited Darkmoon Island while the fair wasn't running to find it populated by warlocks and demons. And, spoiler alert, but one of the warlocks turns out to be a dreadlord. This could all suggest the fair is run secretly by dreadlords and demons, but I don't think so. For a start, during the warlock questline, we never meet anyone who we know from the fair usually. We also know not all the fair's carnies can be demons or dreadlords in disguise because we've heard their stories about how they joined. I think it's more likely that Darkmoon Island is available to other groups when the carnies aren't around, sort of like a church group renting their hall out on weekdays. There's also the fact that the warlock questline is exactly the same even when the fair is running. This is probably not something we should read too much into. The game itself wasn't ever likely to make a class questline unavailable for a week every month, but if you want to read too much into it anyway, it could suggest that the whole Warlock Darkmoon Island thing is an illusion or even an alternate reality. In Blood Runs Thicker, the fair is in South Shore. Otherwise, we've never seen it outside of the above-mentioned locations. In the Warcraft RPG, which is not officially canon but has contained information that has been confirmed to be canon later, the fair spends most of its time in parts unknown. Bran Bronzebeard tries to discover more about the history of the fair, but mostly fails. All they know is the fair only appeared fairly recently. I think it's possible the fair travels outside the realms of space and time. There are obviously game reasons for never seeing the fair outside of that single week every month, but that could also translate to the fair just not being on Azeroth at that time. Especially since we already know it used to have Outland in its rotation. It could also explain that one ghost's story, which brings me to the ghosts. This island has several secrets, and while you're exploring its woods, you might notice little sparkles now and then. That's because Darkmoon Island is haunted, and those sparkles are the ghosts. To speak to the Darkmoon Ghosts, you first have to die yourself. Once in the spirit realm, you can interact with them to learn tidbits about their stories, and these may hint at an even darker side of Silas. First, there are the ghosts that reference Silas directly. Cup Coincare is a goblin who joined the Darkmoon Faire after falling into a large amount of debt. Silas promised to pay off Cup's debt for him as long as he worked at the fair, but Cup tried to leave before the debt was fully repaid. He didn't think anyone at the fair would mind. Zazla is a troll who seems to have had quite the run of bad luck. He barely survived a shipwreck, he was captured, and he was supposed to be executed. But Silas and the fair kept him safe. By the sounds of it, Zazla's captors died a horrible death, which he laughed at. After his father tried to kill him as a child, Brenda Pawson joined the fair to get away from his family. He told Silas he never wanted to see his family again. This one only ever speaks negatively about his time before joining the fair, not his time at the fair itself. But he does say something strange. He claims that he ran away from his home in Strom. Stromgarde hasn't been named that for several thousand years. This has led to speculation that Silas is a lot older than he appears. Based on these alone, Silas is beginning to sound quite scary. Cup's story in particular could be read as implying he was killed by Silas for his betrayal. I didn't think anyone would mind, it sounds like someone did, and they killed him for it. Most of my debt was repaid, I think. Sounds like either it wasn't, or that it was, but it didn't matter because he still owed some debt. It's all very Faustian in nature. And this could also fit in with something we've seen of Silas so far. He's all about family and will protect his own. But what if someone betrays that family by trying to leave? Zazla's story might imply that the horrible death his captors suffered was at the hands of the Darkmoon Faire. And that doesn't contradict what we know of Silas either. We've seen what he's capable of, especially if a member of his family is threatened. This story also raises questions about Zazla himself. Why was he going to be executed? Were his captors just evil, or had he committed some terrible crime? We can also see some evidence of bloodthirstiness in the fact that he laughed at his captor's death. But there's no way to know if his captors were particularly cruel to him or not. Now, as I said, Brenda Pawson is the one who had people wondering how old Silas is. And it is possible that Silas is some ancient being who recruited Brenda thousands of years ago. It's also possible that, because he left when he was a child, Brenda just got the name of his home wrong. It could just be that Silas had an ancestor with the same first name. That's not exactly uncommon. It could also have been an error on behalf of the devs. But even if it was, they could have fixed it long ago. The fact that it's still Strom suggests either it wasn't an error or they decided to just run with it. I personally think the most likely reason is Silas and the Darkmoon Faire travel through space and time. You know, a nice and simple explanation. As I've said earlier, this could explain why we've only ever seen them 1 week out of every month. The rest of the time they're on other planets, or in other realities, or are in other points of time. Either way, it would have given them plenty of opportunity to adopt a kid from Strom. The rest of the ghosts don't mention Silas directly, but they are still tied to the fair. Franklin Jenner is a human who fought in one of the wars against the orcs. He ran away with the fair after being promised respite from the horrors of war. By the sounds of it, he regrets or feels sorry for joining the fair. So many have died at my hands. I just wanted to escape those horrors. Martha Weller is a human who viewed the Darkmoon Faire as her family, and she would never leave her family. She talks about never leaving an injured friend alone, and also about having so many people to tend to. Considering these are the thoughts her ghost is clinging to, it sounds like the fair was dealing with some sort of cataclysmic event, which caused a lot of injuries when she died. Arlon Sherhoof is a Tauren who died in the Darkmoon Island's woods. Her job was to keep close watch over the camp, and she's still taking this job seriously, even in death. Though she also clearly failed at it. These woods are dangerous, a lesson she learned the hard way. Cythera Wellspun is a blood elf ghost who was gathering wood when she died. Her ghost can be found quite close to Arlon's, and by the sounds of it, she was part of the same campsite that Arlon was supposed to be guarding. All that she saw before she died was something in the bushes nearby. I am curious as to why Arlon and Cythera were in a camp to begin with. Their deaths could have happened around when the fair first settled on Darkmoon Island, so while they were still setting up camp and hadn't built a permanent location yet. It could also be that they were fleeing the fair. But while it is possible Silas is going around killing his own carnies left, right and center whenever he thinks one of them is leaving, I don't think that's the case. Darkmoon Island is supposed to be dangerous. Players have both Moonfang and the Darkmoon Bunny to contend with. There's also Rona Greenteeth, who sells a lot of questionable meat that she claims to catch and prepare herself. Rona seems to live by herself in the Darkmoon Woods, so I don't think she's part of the Faire family. And we know the woods are really dangerous, so the fact that she seems safe enough could just be because she's what's dangerous in them. If Rona is the culprit, it's a bit weird that Silas seemingly has done nothing about it. Unless she is part of the Darkmoon Faire and Silas lets her take out anyone who tries to leave their family. But that seems unnecessarily complicated. Also, she's a Forsaken, and Horde players know that just because they cannibalize doesn't mean they're murderers or something. The fact that she claims to catch her prey herself might, but her victims could be anyone. Shipwrecked sailors, the captors who Zazla saw suffer a horrible death, or the dead carnies. It's impossible to know. Hold on, Rona killing a bunch of people? Ugh, worst foreshadowing ever. But I am interested in the fact that all these spirits are clearly bound to the Darkmoon Faire. Even the ones who wanted to leave in life seem unable to in death. That could have something to do with the way the fair moves around. Maybe it's required to bind everyone for the trick to work. But, weirdly, more than anything else, this is the thing that makes me suspicious of Silas. You can't just bind people's ghosts to places they don't want to be bound to, man. That's not cool. Well, that and the fact that he allows Chester to still hang around. In an underwater cave east of Darkmoon Island that's called the Cave of Lament, several fell-blood elves called Erinus can be found. They drop the Ring of Promises. Deep gash marks indicate that whatever once wore this ring tried in vain to remove it. This starts a quest called Broken Promises, where we take the ring to Chester, who cheerfully tells us, "Ah, I see that you found my lovelies. Beautiful, aren't they? It's a shame that the process drives them so insane." The ring is yours to keep, of course. Can you hear them whisper? Marvelous. And then he gives us the Ring of Broken Promises, which can transform us into an Erinus. Like, what the hell? Arrest this man. No, bury him alive in an unmarked grave. Hunt and kill him and feed him to the visitors. Feed him to the old gods. Oh right, the title of this video is Silas Darkmoon an Old God? I should probably get to that now. The Old God connections to the Darkmoon Faire isn't exactly subtle. What with the Old God eyes all over the place, and it's only gotten less subtle over time, with new attractions like the roller coaster reinforcing the Old God aesthetic, or the Darkmoon trading post items that conveniently provided my Shadow Priest with the perfect outfit and mount to go with her name. Hearthstone has especially played into this with its Madness at the Darkmoon Faire expansion pack. I'm not too clued up on Hearthstone, but I do know it's kinda like the RPG in the fact that it's not officially canon, or rather it has its own canon, but a lot of it has tended to show up in the official canon later, so it's fair game to look at it for lore hints.
They warned you, stay away. We whisper, come and play. Now you're here, then why not stay at the Darkmoon Faire? Though things aren't as they seem, just ignore those eyes that gleam. Come laugh and maybe scream at the Darkmoon Faire.
I just want to pause here and remind you of the in-game Darkmoon Faire sign that tells you to ignore the eyes that blink and stare. Based on this, those eyes are definitely Old God related. The video is also hinting that at least some of the Faire's carnies, and maybe even some of their prizes, are creatures of the void in disguise. On a completely unrelated note, I love the Darkmoon Faire buff hats. They're great.
You may think that you're dreaming, flying on a carousel. Surely there's nobody scheming or putting you under a spell.
Okay, so one thing about the Darkmoon Faire is it's unclear how they can afford to even run. Over on Classic, you can even ask Silas about it, and he basically tells you not to worry about it. Silas, why is most everything at the fair free? How do you make a profit? It's not always about money, Clem. While we receive generous donations, some extremely substantial, our traveling troupe of performers is fueled creatively by the need to brighten this war-torn world. Don't worry about us, but instead let us worry about how to best entertain you. It's all very altruistic sounding, but the fact remains that if the Darkmoon Faire isn't motivated by profit, it's probably motivated by something else, which, sure, could just be the joy of performing. As a creative myself, I question that one. The joy of creation is certainly rewarding, but sooner or later, even artists have to eat. If you look again at the Hearthstone video, as it suggests surely nobody's scheming or putting you under a spell, the Darkmoon carousel flips over and we see some sort of creature underneath. Some sort of old god type creature.
Shadows dancing, bounding leaves, swinging up the thing that sleeps.
Right, okay, so the thing that sleeps in Azeroth is pretty much always an old god. And now, look at this.
Right behind you something creeps and moves in the night with a dreadful delight at the dark moon
And there's N'Zoth, who shows up in the expansion pack as well, along with the other old gods that we know of. But who is this? Also N'Zoth? It could be. It also looks an awful lot like that 5th old god we've spoken about before during my Xalatath is the 5th old god video. I'm probably wrong about that one, but I don't think I'm wrong about there still being a 5th old god out there. Not Gahoon, for basically the same reasons I cited before. First, the in-game book The Old Gods and the Ordering of Azeroth has always stated there are 5 old gods, not 4, and it has consistently done this even when a new version was added in Legion and an annotated version was added in Dragonflight. Second, while Chronicles claims there are only 4 gods, it has artwork that hints otherwise. On a page where the 4 known old gods can be seen in the margins, a 5th old god is included, one that we hadn't seen before. Third, that same old god showed up in the War Within, on this mural that you are only able to see in-game once during the main level up campaign. A quest in Azkahet takes you into an area with it, but once that quest is over, you can't return. But that also features in the Threads of Destiny animated short. With that in mind, this could, and given what happens afterwards, probably does illustrate being eaten by N'Zoth, but it could also illustrate being eaten by the 5th old god. The two are pretty similar looking. And again, you can't take Hearthstone too seriously, but when I looked up this deck, I found this really interesting. Here we have N'Zoth, Cthulhu, Yashiraj, and Yogg-Saron. The last 3 are rated 10, have a value of 10. Again, I don't know anything about Hearthstone, but I see these numbers over here, so I'm going to say they're worth 10 gems. N'Zoth, ever disrespected, is only 9 gems. But the other 10 gem card is the Darkmoon Rabbit, which is pretty funny. The Darkmoon Rabbit could absolutely be the 5th old god in disguise, and I wouldn't even complain if that turned out to be true. And then, of course, there's Silas at 7 gems. He has an ability to choose a direction to rotate all minions. I don't know what that means, but it does remind me again of the trailer, where the Darkmoon Faire itself is rotated to reveal the hidden old god stuff. Back in World of Warcraft, during Battle for Azeroth, an alchemy questline involved helping our trainer remember a recipe after losing half of it. In the end, we find the missing half to see it is signed by Silas Darkmoon, and we learn how to create Silas's sphere of transmutation. The sphere's surface swirls and shifts, showing different images for brief moments, never long enough to see what they actually are. This item has a use. Concentrate on the sphere to transmute it into another object for 1 hour. Basically, it's a philosopher's stone. The things it can transform into includes a health potion, always useful for carnies, a potion of prosperity, which may explain how the Darkmoon Faire keeps afloat, a stone of transportation that summons an all-seeing eye who will teleport you to a nearby safe haven. Now, isn't that interesting? I was just speculating that the Darkmoon Faire may have some unconventional method to travel around, and here we have evidence that they do. This stone doesn't take you outside of Battle for Azeroth zones, or to other planets, or through time, but it's still good to know that Silas has the ability to create something that can move you around like this. And also interesting that it involves that signature Darkmoon eye. Oh, and the final thing this sphere can create is a decanter of disguise that allows you to change your appearance. And that is particularly interesting because now we know for sure Silas can disguise his appearance. So, is Silas the 5th Old God? Personally, I don't think so. First, in Blood Runs Thicker, we see Silas having to ask the Darkmoon's fortune teller, Sage, for information about the murder, which I'm not sure he'd have to do if he was an old god himself. It could just be that he's a very sweet old god who likes everyone in his Carney family to feel special and needed. And it could be that things have changed in the lore since this comic was written. It could even be that the real Silas is dead and is being puppeted by an old god, Xalatath style. But I'm more likely to believe Silas has some sort of deal or relationship with the old gods, maybe even the 5th old god. From the start, the Darkmoon Faire's logo has been this old god eye against a purple backdrop, surrounded by these yellow banners, beneath some sort of star. Over the years, we've seen how versions of this eye suggest that they may not be banners, but rather tentacles. And oh boy, once again, I'm going to pull up this image. Notice the giant eye in the center, the surrounding tentacles, the stage, the way it looks like it might be eating people, the giant, star-like crystal it's reaching out towards. Now, imagine you're looking at this picture from above, and look again at the logo, and the sort of Pac-Man open mouth that looks like it's about to eat that star. If I reach any further, I'm probably going to pull something. But isn't it cool how actually this could have been an image of the 5th old god hiding in plain sight all along? Like, yes, this evidence is shaky at best, but you still can't prove to me it's not. When the Darkmoon Faire first relocated to Darkmoon Island, Blizzard announced the change with a blog post written from the perspective of Silas, and that includes this fascinating paragraph. Things have changed round here. We've got an island all to ourselves now, and what an island it is. Mist-shrouded Darkmoon Island is a conundrum wrapped in an enigma. It is a place of mystery and wonder, and you wouldn't believe the deals we made to get it, or who we made them with. Again, the Darkmoon Hearthstone video blatantly shows the Faire is secretly an old god in disguise. Maybe this whole time, the Darkmoon Faire has been an old god in hiding. The 5th old god, who has kept himself sustained by feeding off the energies Silas and his carnies managed to bring to it. This deal could be why the Faire has a permanent home on Azeroth now, even if the carnies do still travel around to other places, because on Azeroth, their fairground is built above an old god. Or maybe not, it is a bit of a stretch, and it would raise a lot more questions, like where was the 5th old god before the Darkmoon Faire was settled on Darkmoon Island? All I know for sure is something strange is going on over at the Darkmoon Faire. But I'm okay with it because a 10% experience and reputation buff. Nobody's gonna complain about that. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, share, sign up for notifications so that you never miss another video, all that good YouTube stuff. You can also join me in thanking my Patreons who are helping to keep this channel alive. Finally, you can occasionally find me on Twitch, where I'm always happy to talk about all things lore. So while that's all for now, hopefully I'll see you again soon.